I want to talk about pleasure now because that's a bit more fun.
This is Interfering Neurotic with me, Dr. Ash King, and mindfulness coach Darren Larson, where we navigate a life lived with the curses and blessings of big feelings. Big feelings can pull us here and there, but often in the direction of pleasure and away from discomfort. Dopamine has a part to play, but what exactly does it do for us, and how can we be wise and mindful when following its pull? In this episode, we welcome our first ever guest, Dr. Anastasia Hronis, author of The Dopamine Brain. Together, we discuss the horrible inevitability of sitting with discomfort, our pursuit of feeling good and where it might lead us astray, and why values are essential on our path to live rich and meaningful lives. Hello, and welcome to Interfering Neurotic. You're here with Dr. Ash King and Darren Larson, your usual suspects, but we are super excited to have our very first guest on the podcast today. We're welcoming Dr. Anastasia Hronis. Welcome, gorgeous. I know Anastasia, so I don't traditionally just welcome people as gorgeous when I've just met them only 5 minutes ago on a Zoom call. So Anastasia and we became friends over LinkedIn. Can you believe it happens? It's real. And Anastasia is a clinical psychologist and fellow psych nerd based in Sydney. She teaches and supervises postgrad students at the University of Technology in Sydney, and she leads her own private practice. She does research in the addiction space, and she also works to support rural mental health. She's also an incredible classically trained pianist and a reincarnated cowgirl, and I've never seen her have a bad hair day. Also, while she's doing all that stuff, she can write books, and they're really good. This is The Dopamine Brain that came out last year. It's fantastic. You should give it a read, and that's kind of what we're going to be exploring today. Welcome, Anastasia. We're so glad you're here.
Oh, well, thank you. That was quite an introduction. I'm excited now.
So first thing we want to dive into is obviously on Interfering Neurotic, we talk about smart people who have big feelings. And I want to know, are you someone who identifies as having big feelings?
In short, yes. I've only realized that in recent years, though, probably like the last couple of years. I think historically I wasn't someone who maybe it wasn't that I didn't have big feelings. I didn't express big feelings. I kept big feelings very much inside. I remember doing a schema questionnaire and scoring quite highly actually on an emotional inhibition quite a few years ago. So I was someone who did not express feelings very much. Nowadays, I don't go more than a few days without crying, that's for sure. So I've come into my big feelings.
That's such a fascinating one. We could just go off on that tangent, couldn't we, Darren, about the idea of emotional inhibition, what that means about the quality and size and texture of our feelings, and whether we're just really well practiced at sort of tamping them down or pushing them out of the way. It's like having dogs locked out in the backyard and you can kind of hear them barking, but they are never allowed to come in the house.
Yeah. Hey, welcome, Anastasia. What I was thinking when you were saying that, when I was younger, would say I was in touch with my feelings. And now I look back at that and laugh. I laugh at what I thought was being in touch, because it was that I had big feelings, but they were big and dramatic and emotional, and they drove my behavior, and they led to big life decisions about career and relationships. But I was not in touch. I don't see myself now looking back as being in touch with them at all. The other thing that you're making me think about is like expression. What is that? Does someone else have to see evidence of it for it to be, valid emotional expression? I have lots of thoughts and feelings about that. So
we could go off, couldn't we? But let's kick off with the it girl in the party, the it girl neurotransmitter, dopamine, all over the internet, being blamed for everything or corralled for everything, being like trying to be used in all manner of ways. I am curious, Anastasia, why do you think that this particular neurotransmitter is the it girl of the season?
The it girl. That's the first time I've heard dopamine described as the it girl, but I'll go with that. I like it. I think we have social media to thank for a lot, but it oversimplifies concepts, right? And so I think people are understandably seeking the quick fix answers to certain problems or, habits that they might identify in their life. And, doing something like a dopamine detox feels like This one thing that I can do, and I throw myself into it and it's going to change things for me. And it's like, well, realistically, it's probably not going to change that much. But I think people are seeking those quick answers. And, with the 1 minute kind of reels and things that we put on social media these days, we have like oversimplified a lot of information and science specifically.
I always have, understood that dopamine has something to do with habits and also drawing us into certain things that give us pleasure. Can you give us a little summary of what dopamine actually does?
What it is and what it does. Yes. So, in short, it's a neurotransmitter. So, it sends messages between our brain and our central nervous system. So, it communicates and it actually does a whole range of things, right? So, it regulates our movements, it regulates some of our kidney function, it helps us store and encode memories. So, it actually does a whole lot. But the thing that it's most known for, or the reason it's having its it girl moment, is because it is involved in this experience of pleasure. And when I say pleasure, I'm really talking kind of like that short-term, pleasurable gratification that we get when we do something that feels really good in the moment versus the sort of like longer-term satisfaction that we might get from doing more meaningful things. So it's activated when we do something that gives us that short-term pleasure, but also in the pursuit of it. So it's one of its main functions is to drive us to do those pleasurable things again and again. And that's how it can be implicated in terms of an addiction developing for someone.
I was just telling Ash how one of the things that frustrates me, someone who reads a lot about psychology and science and mindfulness, and it's even if you are trying to pay attention and reading and seeking a different, variety of opinions and expertise, there's information it seems sound and evidence-based, but then like two people who I respect might have a different take on things. Do you find that there's like any division are there certain people who place more significance on dopamine and its role it plays in like pleasure and addiction than other scientists,
Well, I think that's such an interesting question. I think, look, not greatly from what I've come across in terms of the research. I think for like psychologists or researchers who are looking at how we can help people change their habits overall, some might lean more on kind of the neuroscience and like dopamine is very much an unconscious process. It's not activated with any degree of awareness. So I think where psychologists and researchers sit on that spectrum of how much control do people really have over their behaviors is maybe almost like a bit of a philosophical one as well, and people will vary there. But in terms of the actual science about dopamine, I mean, it's been researched for years. I think it's relatively well established.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think are some of the weirdest, these are probably not very well trained, neuropsychs or scientists, but people on the internet have said that dopamine can do for you, or they try to get you to do some sort of dopamine related thing?
Yes, the influencers will tell you to do things like dopamine detoxes. And look, I think dopamine detoxes have been sold and packaged in a number of different ways, but the real common one that sort of went around is this like 24 hours, kind of almost like lock yourself in a dark room, don't do anything pleasurable. So it's not just about like trying to break bad habits in terms of, don't drink a glass of wine that night, but it's also like, don't listen to music, don't eat any food that is tasty, don't socialize with your friends, like don't do anything that might activate dopamine, which is not possible, right? Like dopamine is naturally produced and it does a whole lot more than just create pleasure. So that's not actually possible, but it's also like not possible to reset or change baselines in such a short period of time. So I think people who do this like 24-hour dopamine detox feel like it's achieving something because it's quite hard to do. Like our body is going to go into some sort of withdrawal if we suddenly remove anything kind of stimulating, and it's going to be uncomfortable and we're going to have to sit with a lot of discomfort. And sometimes that feels like it's achieving something, but probably what it's achieving is you went 24 hours sitting with discomfort, and that's great, but that's not
Exactly.
changing dopamine levels.
It reminds me of, so I come to these conversations with a background in mindfulness and annual silent meditation retreats. And there's something about that aesthetic, the decrease in stimulation for 4 days a week, 10 days longer, right? And then I find the danger in that is people think that those conditions are required to cultivate the kind of skills that we're developing with mindfulness. I think there's something similar. I really appreciated a lot about your book, but when you start talking about sitting with discomfort as a skill to actually start to realize what the benefit or potential of what we're talking about here. One, talking about dopamine is one thing. Sitting with discomfort, I guess it's theory and practice, right? It's like, and I appreciated some of the tangible ways that, can I just say this? I don't know what it is about the US Australian mindful divide, or if it's just my algorithm, but I was so relieved when you have an exercise in there that's not breath aware. Can I just tell you that's not breath awareness, and it was sensory involving all your senses? And I'm like, oh my God, what is it about Australian mindfulness? Where do you guys realize this? Because this is one of the challenges I have. And sitting with discomfort is, to me, really the whole point of a mindfulness practice, not to be relaxed all the time. Right? But to navigate big feelings if you have them, for example.
I think that's such a good example, what you just said, of like how sort of pop psychology media has like oversimplified the concept of mindfulness, and it's been sold as a relaxation strategy. And I know that whenever I talk about mindfulness to clients, the first thing I will do is actually ask them, like, what have you heard about it? What do you know about it? What do you understand it to be? And I've never really heard someone say, oh, a way to sit with discomfort. Usually they say,
Right.
it's a way to relax. And then the follow-on comment from that, because mindfulness is not necessarily relaxing, is that they'll say, I actually have tried mindfulness and I can't really do it properly because I never feel relaxed at the end. So not only have they had this kind of misconception around what it is, they then think they can't do it or they're doing it wrong because they're not achieving that outcome. So I think that's an example of just like where the nuance is lost in the way that some of this information is communicated.
Yeah.
We're talking about discomfort, but I want to talk about pleasure now because that's a bit more fun. We talk a lot about big feelings on this podcast, and the idea of sort of being aware of those pleasure experiences in your life. Sometimes I'm curious about why some things really have that hit of pleasure for us and other things kind of don't. And it usually is the things that we wish, I wish that I would get the pleasure hits when I was sitting with a really big bowl of like healthy salad and or like drinking a large glass of water, and they just don't hit. And I know that those are the things that are going to nourish and nurture my body or whatever. And yet they don't really have the same bang for their buck in terms of pleasure points as, a huge bag of greasy chips or a glass of
Mm.
wine.
Yes, some things are certainly more pleasurable than others, right? And so if we think about why dopamine exists from an evolutionary perspective, the reason it exists is because back then, seeking out food was hard work, right? So for the purpose of survival of the species, we needed dopamine to be activated to motivate, the prehistoric men and women to actually like hunt for the food and forage for food, and then they had the reward when they ate it. Also with sex, right? We needed dopamine for, the purpose of survival of the species and procreation. The thing is that nowadays we have so many scientists and researchers that can spend time and money looking at the perfect combination of things that will activate dopamine to be able to sell products, right? So like, big bag of Doritos or something that didn't naturally exist. So dopamine itself wasn't necessarily being activated back in the days because there wasn't Doritos, but now we know like, oh, these are the combinations of like, salt and sugar and fat or whatever it might be that makes people crave more, that activates that dopamine. It's the same with technology. the big tech companies know exactly how to kind of manufacture social media so that it is stimulating and exciting and enticing to the brain. So it's not that dopamine itself is bad in any way, it's that we've kind of almost hacked into ways to keep it being stimulated and activated.
Right. I saw this explanation once, sort of like taking psychological insights and doing exactly what you're saying, turning those into profitable traps for people. And I remember you talk about in the book riding waves, right? Being able to mindfully ride waves of discomfort. And we could say pleasure too. But I've seen this graphed out from a business perspective. They showed as discomfort increases as a wave of discomfort, so uncertainty, fear, anxiousness, right, as that's increasing, before it reaches a peak is where people try to put the brakes on by going online to buy things or distracting themselves or buy. It's profitable, people will buy a martini or two to not feel that discomfort. And then on the other side, when Ash is talking about pleasure, I'm fascinated by this, that the pleasure of maybe the first drink or the first piece of cake peaks and then it starts to go down, and we want to sustain that. So we repeat the behavior, right? Something like that. Does that feel like that's related to dopamine as well? That trying to sustain pleasure that's starting to dissipate?
Yes, it's exactly the case. So dopamine's job is to get you to do or eat or drink the thing that feels good. Once you've got it, it's like when you eat a block of chocolate, you have the first bit and you're like, oh, yum, delicious. Second bite, you're like, yep, this is nice. Third bite, you're probably thinking about something else. Because it's like, I've done my job. I get that kind of initial excitable, pleasurable feeling at the start, and then it drops off. And then we're halfway through a block of chocolate being like, why am I eating this?
Is that the same with relationships? You think with people, or when people meet someone new that feels very fresh and exciting and dynamic, and you're like, woo, I need to see them again?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And look, the brain likes novel, exciting things, right? And it likes, we know about like intermittent reinforcement schedules. It likes things that are unpredictable as well. If something is predictable, it's less exciting to the brain.
Mm.
When we're dating or meeting new people, there's an excitement because there's that element of surprise and novelty and still new things we're discovering about that person. Um, and that's that kind of pleasurable feeling at the start. 6 months in, we might still like or love that person, but it's a different feeling. It's not as exciting anymore because we've, uncovered a lot of those sort of things that were mysterious at the start.
It's like the first bite of the block of chocolate. And maybe it's a type of pleasure that we could train ourselves to be more mindful or aware of. Like this texture of pleasure is one of those things that's like really nice when it shows up. And yet I know that this is not viable as something to hold on
Mm.
long term.
There was one of the experts I was referring to a minute ago, I just recently heard say, and tell me if this is consistent with how you see it, that the dopamine is involved in that short-term pleasure, like the dating, like hitting it off with someone. And then I think he said that serotonin was more about the sustaining of something that led to contentment. I don't know if that's going too far to like assign all these properties to specific neurotransmitters, but is that something like what's happening, that there's different neurotransmitters that kick in for different things that we're cultivating?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As you say, like serotonin with those kind of like longer term feelings of mood, like mood regulation and kind of happiness in the broader sense, as opposed to the moment to moment kind of experience of pleasure or happiness. And then, we've got like oxytocin, which is like the feel good butterflies in the tummy when you give someone a hug or you're hanging out with a friend or there's some sort of social interaction. So there's definitely different ways to experience variations of joy, happiness, pleasure, excitement, and different neurotransmitters are activated kind of depending on what that experience is like.
Yeah, I think that pleasure is something that can be obviously existing amongst a range of other feelings. I'm curious about, definitely when I've been at my lowest and maybe not necessarily all that conscious of how poorly I was feeling, because again, when you're feeling really low, it can be scary to go there, to sort of lean in and be like, how are things going? And so I found that those were the moments where I was much more likely to chase those little easy dopamine hits. And I feel like this was probably what you would see in the addiction space too.
Yeah, absolutely, because they are easy to get, right? Like whether it be, something we can eat, something we can drink, or, some behavior that involves technology, like it's all easily accessible to us. We don't have to work very hard for it. I mean, we can get dopamine activated by doing like, a 30-minute workout. But when we're not feeling good, that's not like they're like, oh, you know what I want to do? Like a 30-minute workout to get dopamine. It's we want the kind of easy options. And that's why these businesses and companies make so much money as well, because they're so accessible.
You said also that it had something to do with the pursuit of longer term goals. So while it tries to get you to do something that's going to be pleasurable, when there's something that you know is going to be pleasurable to achieve, but it's going to take longer, how does it work then?
Yes. So we get dopamine being activated when we do something hard and we feel the success or achievement at the end of it, right? So exercise is one of those examples, but anything where, I don't know, if someone's got a uni assignment to write and they do it and they hand it in, there's that kind of feeling at the end of it of like, oh, I succeeded, I achieved something, or any kind of project we might put our mind to. So dopamine is meant to be a motivator because doing things can be hard to kind of get us through and provide us with that drive to be able to achieve what it is we want.
I don't know if this is taking it too far. I'm just going to throw this in because this is maybe I'm applying this wrong, but I also try to hook people's attention about mindfulness of discomfort. So I often encourage people that it can be so simple, like noticing when your bladder is full is a uncomfortable sensation, and the feeling of your bladder being relieved when you empty it is and I wonder, is it something like dopamine is always lurking in there? Because I always say your body likes that relief and you could savor it when it appears. It's like low-hanging fruit, but it's something that what I find is in these Goldilocks moments or these delicious reliefs of daily ordinary tasks and things, right? When we accomplish, we zip right past the checking it off the list and we don't savor I think the relief is subtle and so much a part of our experience that it just gets backgrounded. So I don't know, is that taking it too far to say that when the body wants to reward us for doing something hard, even if that's going to the bathroom, is that like, could it be in there, lurking in there as part of the chemistry of that experience?
Yeah, I think it could be. Like, I'm not sure of the like hard science behind that, but I think
Yeah,
it makes sense based on what you're describing. Like anything that feels like it might create some stress or be a bit hard to then kind of have that relief and release is
yeah,
definitely sort of in some ways kind of pleasurable for the body, right? It might not
right,
be to the same degree as I don't know, purchasing something online, like some online shopping or something that's going to give you a
right.
sure. And I like what you say about savoring the moments because I mean, I talk a lot about like, dopamine's not good or bad. It's not bad to experience pleasure, but as long as we're doing it in combination with those more values-based experiences, and those are not always like highly pleasurable, but they can be meaningful. And I think that's where savoring those moments really comes into it because if we're engaging with something that's not highly pleasurable, but it's meaningful to us, then that's where we do really want to lean into that experience.
I always love the distinction between feeling good in your life and feeling good with your life or about your life, and how we don't often talk about the difference of those two. Feeling good in your life means having a lot of positive
Mm,
emotions or positive emotional experiences like pleasure, like joy, like excitement, which can mean that you have this life that's full of novelty and excitement. And I often think about a lot of the rock star vibes of having all these incredible different women all the time going on stages,
mm,
making loud music, doing drugs, and and their life was full of pleasure in that term, quick hits of pleasure. But then you read a lot of these men, like biographies, men and women, and you hear that there was a real undercurrent of dissatisfaction, of sadness, of them running away from things, of them trying to deny certain things. And you recognize that that lifestyle is quite different from someone who is happy with their life, which I know you talk about values and recognizing your values and making choices that lead you towards your values. And I think that values piece is essential when it comes to, okay, am I happy with my life? Am I happy with what I've done and how I've showed up?
Yes, absolutely. I often think of like the counter maybe to what you described as people who are very much in the advocacy space, and often like advocacy because they have some sort of lived experience of some sort of trauma, right? And the people who kind of go out every day and advocate and fight for change in the world and for what they believe in, and share their kind of personal stories of trauma. And I think that's not pleasurable. That's not nice. I'm sure they're not having a great time
Mm,
doing
mm,
that, but it's probably incredibly meaningful to them. So I imagine those people, if they step back and look at their life, it might
mm,
be every day I feel all this joy and happiness, but I feel content with what I'm doing with my life and that sort of bigger picture
mm,
satisfaction.
It makes me think of the first few years of parenting, actually, where the pleasurable experiences for me are few and far between. And yet you keep showing up in this dedicated way because you want to be the sort of parent that does that. And when the
mm,
kids just like a babbling ball of flesh and crying and poop and vomit, at least for me, I'll speak for myself here. It wasn't that there was a lot of rewards, and you'd snap on every little change where you might get some increased experience of connection, like the first smile, right? Or then when they can say a word, and you're kind of clinging to these moments. And now, a few years in, my son's a bit older, recognizing that, wow, all that time where I probably had to go, oh, I'll push pleasure to the side here and there so that I can show up in a values-based way, makes me reflect on, wow, that was meaningful and important at the time, even though it was really bloody hard.
You didn't get pleasure
mhm.
cleaning up vomit and poo.
Oh my
I feel like
goodness.
I don't want to warn you too harshly, but wait, just keep waiting. Well, when my daughter was a teenager, I have stories, but I could, spoiler alert, tell you that the most difficult times in her adolescence have been what I value the most about my parenting experience, right? So there's something there. There's such a they're little moving little targets developmentally that novelty continues and the complexity intensity continues. You know what? There's something I was going to ask you since we have you. I heard someone. I'm using you to fact check all my dopamine myths, but someone said that a current problem, especially with young men being online, is they're depleting their, I don't know if depleting is the right word, but they're getting their dopamine, maybe, okay, I'll say depleted. You can correct me, virtually, leaving not enough left over or no motivation left over to do the things in the real world. So they're experiencing something alone in a basement or with a laptop instead of socializing or going on dates. Would you agree that there's some kind of, I don't know, help me out here. Is there something that's being exhausted, or we're using up a budget in one virtual domain and then not having enough left over for the real world? Is that right?
Yes, so there's some sort of tolerance that builds and our baseline changes over time. And so because with tech, we are artificially, I guess, activating dopamine. And what we find is that dopamine is activated more frequently and in kind of like lots of short little bursts. And then what happens is people go out in the world and they might still go
Mm,
and kick the footy around, or they might go on a date, but it doesn't kind of feel as
mm,
as what it would if we hadn't spent so much time in front of the screens, because we're not getting those constant kind of short feelings of dopamine being activated. It's kind of like that feeling when, if you don't have your phone or a laptop with you, and you can't check it for a while, but your mind keeps going there and you keep thinking about it, there's that pull back to it because we can
mm.
do it more frequently, and in a different kind of way than how the real world activates our dopamine.
It always takes me back to the challenge is like on the other side of discomfort is what you really want. And we have so many ways, and they're all incentivized with lots of profit motives to have us never be uncomfortable, never be bored, never be lonely, right? And I feel like that's at the heart. Now, if we could just real quick crack the code on this and solve it, right? Right? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to sell? This is actually, I'm asking for a friend, me. How am I supposed to make the skill of being better at being uncomfortable? How are we supposed to sell this to the world, especially young people, when they don't ever have to be? Like, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? How are we supposed to get the young people to be uncomfortable willingly?
How do you package it up in a way that's like really nicely appealing when it sits next to a like
Is it just an oxymoron? It's just impossible? I don't.
I think yeah, they repel each other. It's like if you want people to accept it, and sometimes you kind of phrase about like learning to like or enjoy or at least be curious about discomfort. And I
Yeah.
think that the actual experience of sort of pleasure and discomfort are mutually exclusive, right? They repel one another. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can't try to use the concept of pleasure or the felt experience of pleasure, because then you would be
Yeah,
eradicating
right. You can't
the
appeal to that.
discomfort.
Right, exactly. Right. I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that? I have theories, Anastasia. What do you think? How do we make
I guess
discomfort more appealing?
I guess we're trying to sell like what's on the other side of discomfort,
Yeah,
right? And like
exactly.
what can we have or achieve in our life if we can sit with discomfort? And I think you said the key word, which is like boredom, is right. How do we
Yeah.
build our capacity to be bored, which we're never bored these days. And it's like, what does that give us? It gives us like greater opportunity for creativity, greater opportunity for expansive thinking, and new exciting opportunities that we might see that we never previously saw. But I mean, they're pretty abstract things
Yeah, right.
that are hard
It,
to sell.
They're edited out of movies. Like even in like Star Wars, you go into the forest and you come out, a Jedi. It doesn't show that this is going to take months and years to have the basic level 1 Jedi, right?
it's fascinating. Again, I'll talk about my kid, recognizing how much this just comes to be. It doesn't feel like it's trained, although maybe it is, but his notion that things should just suddenly be achievable or possible or instant.
Uh-huh.
And I remember he cried once when I said I bought him a book online and he had to wait for it to be here. And this idea of this instant gratification culture, which I think as we've moved through the generations has become more apparent. Now I want my Uber Eats in 30 minutes or less. And we don't need to wait that much for the
Right.
things that we want to give us pleasure. And I remember that someone said, yes, but we need to learn and we need to train ourselves to do that, because the things that are the most rewarding, usually in our lives, like careers that we've spent lots of time learning and leaning into and expanding ourselves within, our relationships where we've committed ourselves, applied ourselves, skills that we've built up throughout dedication and practice and patience.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things you can't just do in a 1 week session or a 24-hour,
Right.
detox moment. They have to be applied over a space of time. And there's no hacks for that.
No, no.
And they all have moments of discomfort in them, right? It's not like if you do something like study or, engage in a long-term relationship, it's not just kind of the duration, but it's the ups and downs of it. And so that's that, being able to wait and stick something out, but also being able to do it when it's hard and uncomfortable.
I also wonder if it's so deeply human to be pulled, if we allow ourselves to be pulled in the direction we're talking about right now, right? So I have this maybe naive hope that this younger generation that has never had to be bored, if they by choice they don't have to be, but I wonder if in the human organism there's a hunger for, like we were talking about, there's simple pleasure and delicious, satisfying pleasure. And is there possibly a hunger strong enough that wants to be experienced? I want something more than this superficial crap all you people are giving and selling me. I don't know. Do you guys think that's possibly there somewhere? It's just easier to focus on the symptoms of it not being there. That makes good headlines, I guess. But I have to believe it's in there. That hunger and human drive or need is in there, waiting for something.
It absolutely is. And I'm sure that maybe Anastasia's had clients like this, people that you work with who may have all the trappings of a very comfortable and satisfied life. And yet there's something else that is not there. And I think that, again, it can be scary to confront that, because that's a form of discomfort too. When you say, well, I have the hunger for something more, and yet I realize that I don't have it yet, and it's going to be bloody hard to get. It'll take time. I'll have to learn stuff. I'll have to be heaps more uncomfortable. And the question, I think, sometimes can be, well, is the discomfort of that whole, what's that adage of, would you prefer the discomfort of your life right now or the discomfort of change to pursue something new? And I think that when we have these conversations about our feelings, about emotions, about discomfort and pleasure, and looking into them and inspecting them and investigating them a little bit closer than just them being things that show up in your body and show up in your mind as you go about your life, gives us a bit of a superpower so that we can choose how we want our lives to be and what we need to do to make them that way.
What do you think, for if our audience, we're trying to find people who are trying to take this idea of having big feelings and saying that that is actually something that society thinks might be a curse, but we see it as a potential blessing. It leads to the arts, it leads to intimacy, it leads to parenting. And what would you say from your experience and your work? What would someone with big feelings, what's one thing you could offer them to say, based on what I've learned, here's something you could do to help turn your big feelings into an asset or a superpower they're proud of, as opposed to something you're trying to tamp down?
Yes, I love this question about how can you turn them into a superpower, because I was like waiting for the question about like, how can you change them? How can you reduce them? And like, no, leave the big feelings. I say it's just listen to them. Like listen to what the feelings are telling you. I think it's a gift for us to have these big emotional experiences, and people who go and do great things in life often do have big feelings, and it drives action. Big feelings can drive action. So listen to what those feelings are telling you and kind of lean into them, take them in the places that they may guide you to. Like always have one eye on how deeply they're taking you somewhere, but do lean in and listen to them.
I love that. We love it.
We love it. We're here waving the flags for big feelings, and we're so grateful that you could come and join us for our chat today. Go and check out the Dopamine Brain, give it a read. There's lots of really practical, crunchy stuff in there that you can dig into if you do want to be moving your life in the direction of the life that you deserve and that you've always dreamed of. So thank you so much, Anastasia.
Thanks for having me.